In a world where Africans have lost their roots, it has become of vital importance to document our ways. In an effort to reverse the brainwashing of the past, where we were made to believe our ways are demonic, we are pressed to create dignified and respectful platforms to unpack our spiritual ways. Moya light, Moya bright. Thank you guys so much for all the support. We are seeing you. It's been 4 months. We're 7,000 subscribers in. You guys are paying the bills. Thank you so much. Today's lesson is a great privilege. Not only is this the oldest Moya elder we're going to have on the platform, but also it's our father, literally by blood, by DNA. So a great privilege to be able to speak on the cycle of life. And us as an African family, Dr. Thami Mazwai has done incredible work politically and also in the business sphere. So we're going to unpack a little bit of our history in South Africa and then go into the entrepreneurial space and talk about how we as an African nation can build ourselves economically. Dada, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
You're welcome.
It's such a privilege and I'm so excited. Siyabulela. So I'm going to start from the beginning because I want to understand how you were conscientized politically. So if you can give us like your background, how you grew up, how you got into politics. I don't speak much on the podcast, so it's basically it's going to be a story time for all of us. So how you grew up and your childhood.
Well, I grew up in the then Western Native Township, which was just next to Sophia Town. And that's where I did my primary school education. And then I went to Matibane High, which was the high school that was serving both Sophia Town and was the Native Township, and of course other areas, because we didn't have too many high schools for blacks at the time. And we then had Form 1, Form 2, Form 3. So I was in Form 1. That's where I did my Form 1, Form 2, and Form 3. And that's where then, when I was doing Form 3, I think it was in 1960, we got a visit from Joe Tolwe to come and conscientize the students at Madibena High on the Pan-Africanist Congress. And obviously, this happened the year before the actual anti-pass campaign. Yes, at Sharpeville. So Joe came, I think, 1959.
How old were you?
Well, I was born in 1944, so in 1958 or 59, I would have been 15, round about there. So that was the last I heard of him and so on. Then at Orlando High, then I passed it, then I went to Orlando High, 1961. And that's where, a lot of the students who had been arrested with Sobukwe were admitted as students at Orlando High, because the then principal, Kambule, refused to accept that instruction from the Bantu Education Department that they must not be admitted. So there were about 6 of these students.
Why were they not being admitted?
Not the department, which was the government, said that because these had been arrested for politics with Sobukwe, they must not be enrolled at school. And Kambule said, these are young people who need an education for their future. So the department could not do anything about that. And so they were at Orlando High, Amos Lamini, I think, Wanda Ngwenya, Freddy Gubeni, Joe Mpaki, and others whose name I've forgotten. And that's how then I got into so I then got into the PAC, and then by the time we'd moved from Western Township to Dube, so I was staying in Dube with grandmother, and there was a branch of the PAC in Dube, and the chairman was Rafael Chabalala, and there were other people there, John Rangwane, and also Ramutibe, the Ramutibe brothers. We had the Tube Youth Club at the time, known as the White Club, and that's where we're very passionate about PAC. And it's 1963 then we tried to launch. It was not very successful, and then a lot of us were arrested. And then later on in the year, I started to go for military training, and I was arrested on my way in Limpopo, on my way to Botswana.
You name all these things, and for the benefit of our audience, because our generation has been almost pulled away from the breast, so we don't know these names. I even want to go to Utatu Sobukwe. Can you tell us who Sobukwe was and what he means to us and why we should know him?
Well, the history of Sobukwe is for all of us. To read. A number of books have been written about him, but he led the walkout of the ANC by the Africanists, and the Africanists felt that the ANC was being controlled by non-Africans. So then there was the conference at Orlando, the ANC conference, where they walked out. So it was, they walked out and formed the Pan-Africanist Congress.
This is, which year was this again? Because
when they walked out,
yeah.
I think it was 58, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay. Because we're trying to connect it to the story, and then, because now we're in your high school, because you mentioned these people, and you mentioned that the department wasn't allowing them to come to school.
Well, the PAC was formed. It broke away from the ANC. I think it was in 1958. Mm-hmm. And operated as an organization. And then in 1959, Joe Tolwe, who was a founder member of the PAC, came to organize me when I was a student at Matibane. I was not the only one, there were others too. So we were organized into the PAC. And then 1960, it was the anti-pass campaign when Sharpeville happened. And Joe was amongst those people who then were arrested because of the campaign, because they had to surrender themselves to the nearest police station. That was the nature of the campaign. So 1961, then they spent, I think, 9 months in jail. So 1961, when I was at Orlando, Joe and the others had been released because they were basically youths, 17 or so years of age. And then Kambole then admitted them back to school as students. And that's why the Department of Bantu Education would not tolerate. But Kambule being Kambule, he just told them to go jump in the lake.
Okay. So this era of your life must have impacted your family.
Yeah, well, at the time, all my Kulu no mama were shocked, that I'm into politics, but they could not do anything about it because I would go to school. So they thought, no, this guy is going to school, and yet that's where the action was. So So
when you say they were shocked, what do you mean? Like, what kind of a background did you have for them to be shocked about consciousness?
That I could be in politics, because their view was that you must first get education and then you can get into politics. And what are you getting into? Do you know? And so on. No, malume, all of them. It was just, it was a nightmare for them, I must say. But it was a big joke for us.
Why do you say that?
No, I mean, I would discuss it with my friends in the PAC and would have a nice laugh about it, because they were also having similar problems at their homes.
Okay, so now we're at school and you're getting conscientized, politicized. How did it lead up to this arrest? Is this also, we've never asked, because is it a difficult thing for you to talk about this era?
No, I don't think. I mean, it happened so many years ago. I mean, 1960, 61 at Orlando High.
Okay, so I can ask.
I was doing matric, final year matric.
Okay, so I can ask the details of being arrested and the trauma and...
Yeah, I mean, it happened and I've forgotten about it now. Or it's just a proud memory, if one can say that.
Do you think that the parents who were who were fighting in the struggle back then should have gone for some kind of counseling, or you think that it works itself out the older you get?
During those days, there was nothing like counseling. If there was any counseling, it would have been in the white community. But with us, everything was in black and white. It's either black or it's white. And there were no management strategies and so on. My parents are just to accept that now I'm in politics, because it's a call. All young people at the time, and even today, they get a specific calling and they participate in whatever they participate, because they believe that as young people, they must get involved in an issue that was a national liberation. And that's how I felt.
So what led up to your arrest? When you say you got into the...
Yeah, well, I mean, when we were leaving the country, I was with three adults. It was Kilbert Makwaza from the PAC, Naboth Njuncha from the PAC, myself PAC, and Lifot Cingo from the ANC. So we got into a train because we were to meet a contact in Potgietersrust, who then drive us to the border. And then we then cross. So we had the train, and then when we met this contact, unfortunately, he had already been turned by the police. So whilst we were in his house, the police arrived because he had tipped the police that were coming. So we were then arrested, and I remember the two police there. It was beat somebody and Kaiser. They came to fetch us from Potgietersrust, and they were locked up at the Pretoria Central Prison. And then the following day, the police thought that because I'm the youngest, they could use me as a witness against the other three. And I was very stubborn, so they did their works on me, assaulting me, and ultimately it was electric torture.
Sure.
So it was so that electric torture, I mean, I would never wish it on my worst enemy. You were handcuffed to a chair, then they tie the wires around your fingers and your toes, then they switch the current on. It's as if 100,000 needles a prick into your body. You just scream and you scream and you scream and so on.
And you're a child that time.
Yeah, and then from there on, then they put it on your private parts, and they give you one shaft of electricity in your private parts, and so that's what we went through. So I then made a statement that I was going to go for military training because that's what they wanted me to say, and it was the truth in any case. But I had been denying. I said I was going for education. But after the electric torch, I had to tell them the truth that I was going for military training. So, and then I was then kept in solitary confinement for, it was the days of the then 90 days without detention act. So I was kept at Wunderboom police station whilst they continued with the other people and so on. So after, I think, 85 days or so, we appeared in court. So I had been in detention for about 3 months.
Alone?
Well, later on, I was joined by Elias Kale, who was an ANC elder, Vuisile Tole, also ANC, and then Solomon Sticks Morewa, who was PAC from Potchefstroom. So 4 of us were in the same tiny cell, and for the first time, we then I became a human being because I was with the people.
You were the youngest still in the cell?
Yeah. And then the second youngest was Morewa.
Sure. So you also ended up in Robben Island at some point?
Well, so I was then in court. I then tried to tell the magistrate, when you are in detention, there was a weekly visit by the magistrate. And then the magistrate came and I told him that, no, I had been assaulted. And he said, don't talk nonsense. You are going to Nkrumah. So that was it. So when I got to court, I again said I was assaulted, and they called the police, Piet van Rensburg, yeah. They put that to him and he denied. He said nothing doing.
Wow.
The statement I made was out of my own free will. So I was then sentenced to 18 months imprisonment. And that's when I went to then look up prison from a Pretoria Central where we were kept. So I went to look up. Now I was an awaiting trial prisoner, I think for several weeks, because that's where I first met the former president of the PAC, Stanley Mukhoba. And then there was also a teacher there who had been arrested, like there was both Julian Bahula, quite a lot of youngsters. So on the 30th of December, I was sentenced. And then I spent my New Year at low cop, maximum security. And so that was, and then Bo Stanley Mukhoba had also now been sentenced. So we're all at low cop, maximum security, and life was terrible. Although we're not working, the police, the prison warders used to take advantage of us. You are punished, you don't get food, and so on. And then at times there was a warder known as grill, he would come, point a finger and say, "Why did you swear at me? Call you outside and beat the daylights out of you. How could you swear at a warder when you're in the cell?" They gave me that beating. And they also gave Ntate Mashamaite, who was probably that beating, and so on. I think Lombard Mbata of the ANC also got that treatment, beating. And there was also the whole issue of because of exercise, because we complained that we want our exercise. And then they said, "No, fine, you want exercise." I said, "No, fine." So now they made us run round the yard at 100 meter speeds. And at every corner there were warders. If you slow down, they hit you with their batons. That you said you wanted to exercise, now you are going to exercise. So you are running at full speed around the yard. And after that, we never complained about exercise.
So I wonder what happened to all these wardens and stuff post 94.
I don't know.
Happily ever after.
I think that they got their retirement. I'm sure some of them have died, and they should be very, very old. And I think all of them have died. I've got no doubt about that. And
so what do you do about forgiveness? Spiritually, how do you, when people have done so much to you?
Well, I mean, I was in the struggle because of a calling that came to all of us young people at the time. And what I went through, though I had not planned for it, is what goes through with every freedom fighter. And so I bear them no grudge. It happened. I've moved on in life.
Okay, so your keen interest for business, how now does that marry? How
Well, I think that to complete this chapter, so then so after because lock-up was a temporary arrangement, then on some morning we were all woken up, and those of us who were serving sentences of less than 2 years were taken to Kroonstad prison, and those who were serving more than 2 years were taken to Robben Island. So I was taken to Kroonstad, and we had our own. My friend then was Thomas Mtanisa. Mtaniso is now passed on. So at Kroonstad it was. We had short trousers, and it was winter. Short trousers, sandals, and a jersey and a shirt, no underwear or whatsoever. We're digging trenches. And but we're still very young, so we were always poking fun at the authorities and so on. So then there was a time when there was a scandal at Robben Island, so the International Red Cross sent a delegation from Switzerland to come and investigate prisons in South Africa, the political prisoners. And they came to Kroonstad, and then I was among the people selected to go and talk to them. And I spilled the...
Good, you sang like a canary.
And so on. So the Red Cross people then challenged the prison authorities, how do you treat people like this? And so on. And then when they left, the warders said, we'll get you. But the Lieutenant Stradom, who was the head of the prison, hit me on the head with his official stick and said, "Yiri puomili puompi velni peich." In other words, this small tree doesn't want to bend. So they then, with Mtaniso, took us back to Low-Cop, and from Low-Cop, then we went to, were taken to Robben Island because we were considered too rebellious. So I've got the distinction then of having been expelled from Kronstadt, from a prison, and sent to Robben Island. So at Robben Island, then it's where we saw people like Mandela, Sisulu. They were in the isolation cells. So whenever we got into trouble, then we were always getting into trouble at our age. So we then would go to the cells and then meet with Bo Mandela and Nabo Sisulu and so on. The Nosobukwe, by this time, he was staying at Robben Island, but at the house, and so on. So when we were going to do work, and so on, so he would stand outside and point to the ground, and would also respond and point to the ground that the land is ours. Then would make the PAC sign until Amapulu realized it. So that's when we started now pointing to the ground and so on. And that was the first time then I saw Usobukwe. And I mean, we're all inspired because he was our God. So and then 1965, I was released from Robben Island.
Okay. So now I can cross into how the interest. So what was it that now changed your focus from business?
Well, politics? I mean, on my release, I mean, we again continued as the underground wing of the PAC. And this time I was a journalist. So the PAC then said that those of us who were journalists, which included Joe and so on, must not involve ourselves in the APLA activities because our role was to tell the outside world about the liberation struggle, because all the newspapers were on the side of the government, and we at the World were then writing it and telling it as it is, and to a lesser extent the Rand Daily Mail, which was also a bit courageous, but the Star, Sunday Times, and the rest were just solidly behind the
captured.
Government. Yeah, they were part of the establishment and so on. So the leadership said that those of us who are in the media must not involve ourselves in XYZ, because when we get arrested, then there'll be nobody to tell the world what and so on. And they were right, because the security police would use any excuse to detain us. This time it was during the 1976 uprising. So obviously, whilst the Star and other newspapers were writing that the police shot at unarmed, that the police were provoked, we were writing the police fired indiscriminately at unarmed students.
Different narratives.
Yeah. So that's why the world was banned and the Percy Koboza was detained. So then Post was formed, and I was in post, and we continued. Post was also banned, and then the Sowetan was founded, and then we continued. I mean, writing, and at this time, I mean, we were active on the underground because we had to be involved in one way. I mean, it was our calling. So after 1997, after 77, we then had Post, and then we had the Sowetan by then.
Who were the, I'm sorry to jump into your mouth, who were the funders of these, like the World?
No, the World was owned by the Argus Group, and the Daily Mail was owned by South African Associated Newspapers. So the World was in the same stable as the Star.
Okay, so were they still, because when you look at today's media,
Yeah.
you see it's mainly controlled by the West and the government forces still, and you don't, the independent ones are really very small. Was it similar?
Yeah, it was similar. At the time, the independent ones was the Weekly Mail, The Voice, New Nation, and by this time, we'd formed the writers, the Union of Black Journalists, in which we made it quite clear that we're going to tell the story as is. We're going to tell the story of the black
Life
of the black man who was oppressed and exploited. So that was the mantra of the Union of Black Journalists. So it was also banned in 1977. So we formed the Writers Association of South Africa, and I was the secretary, national secretary. And then we formed, and then that then became the Writers. It was changed into Media Workers Association of South Africa, and I was the treasurer. So I used to travel a lot overseas, going to meetings of the International Federation of Journalists as representative of Moya and so on. And going overseas was just to spread the gospel of liberation, because I also addressed the United Nations at one stage. I addressed groups of people in London. And when we were at Harvard, I'd won a scholarship to go to Harvard. And there we used to go all over the States preaching the gospel and talking about the PAC. So I then got arrested again, of course, in 1980. One of the student leaders, Kososi Atlolo, had skipped the country, and then he came back. I don't know, but he met with Zwelakhe. Zwelakhe was banned. And Zwelakhe said, no, rather meet with Thami. So Koso came to meet with me, and with his, and he was accompanied by another exile. So as we were busy having a meeting at this hiding place of theirs, the police came. How they knew, I don't know. Up till to this day, I don't know. So we're detained again, and
but there's very few of you in the room.
Detained, and then Kodzo was charged under the. He was charged, and then the police said I must go and give evidence against him that he had a meeting with me and so on. So I said, you must be mad. Me give evidence. So we went to court, and I refused to give evidence. The others were Thabo Ndabeni, Kata Sileka, who is now passed on, was PAC. Thabo Ndabeni was Black Consciousness. And Siposo Macele was also Black Consciousness. And then there was Solomzi Selani was also PAC. So all of us then were sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. And we're kept in solitary confinement now for 8 months. Whilst they were busy with their Khoso story. So I was in solitary confinement for 8 months, and most of the time I was at Heidelberg. So then after that, we're sentenced to 2 years. So this second time, then I spent 2 years plus 8 months behind bars. This time then I was taken again to low cop. The treatment had improved by now because of international pressure. And I then were taken to Victor Fester. And that's where we spent our sentence. And then we brought back a month earlier before to Sun City. So we spent the last month of our term at Sun City prison. So now it is then when I was at Victor Fester that as we were cleaning, we found the financial mails that were read by Abu, the Black Consciousness 6, the Frelimo 6, the people who had been jailed for organizing the Frelimo rally. Obrim Mkwape, Strini Moodley, Seth Scooper. I've just forgotten the others. So there, when I saw those financial mails, my outlook in life was always political. So when I saw those financial mails, I said, this is where the real struggle is. So when I was released, I then started the business pages in the Sowetan newspapers, And that was the first business news section for blacks in the country. So I started it. And that's where my interest came then into the whole area of small business. So in 1990 or 1990, I think it's 1992, my wife died. And I then left Sowetan just to go and try and start life afresh, because I then had children. I had to be father and mother and so on. So I then went to work for African Life to run their publication, which I then bought and started my own company, Mafube Publishing, which I just devoted to black economic empowerment. And that's how I've moved on the basis of the economic empowerment of our people. I did my MBA and then did my doctorate on small business with the University of Pretoria after doing my master's via the MBA. So
And the magazine Enterprise, I'm sure, also opened a lot for black business, ne?
Yeah, well, it was very popular amongst black professionals and so on, because it was not looking at black participation in the economy in terms of shibins and taxes. Yes. I had pitched it higher, being part and parcel of the commanding heights of the economy. And that's what my outlook was in the magazine. Unfortunately, the magazine was competing with the more established magazines. So it went south. And then I went to the University of Johannesburg, where I started the Small Business Center. And I was there for, I think, 7 years. Then I reached retirement age. Then I went to the Vets Business School, also to be part of their small business school. And then I started to start MTR Dynamics. I think it was in 2008 and so on. And MTR Dynamics. And that's how I've been involved in the whole area of small business development, because it's a question of how do you integrate blacks into the economy. There are many strategies, obviously. Some will talk of the shares that they bought into Anglo-American, into countries like Anglo-American, and others will look at empowerment in terms of the Employment Equity Act. And some will, but my approach is that let us grow our small businesses to be, because in that way you are going to make a tremendous shift in the structure of the economy.
Yes.
And that is my argument and so on. So that's why I'm still busy up till to this day. On driving the entrepreneurship and small business agenda.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. But when you say your magazine went downhill because it was competing with more established, that's the situation for most black people, and still to this day. So how are we going to, how do we fix that? I mean, even now, me having to compete with bigger broadcasters, with SABC, with MultiChoice, how do we get into, how do we break the barriers?
Well, empowerment has got to be a specific, you've got to have an appropriate strategy. The Afrikaners had Afrikaner empowerment, and they were very effective. The downside of Afrikaner empowerment, of course, was that blacks were marginalized, or
it was at our expense,
and so on. They were oppressed, exploited. So we paid the price for Afrikaner empowerment. But when you look at it broadly, it was much more focused and dynamic. Now, our empowerment, unfortunately, is dependent on us working closely with existing businesses. And those existing businesses are not going to breathe life into their competitors, for tomorrow. So that's why I'm pushing the small business sign. How do we grow our small businesses? That's why I started the program on National Gazelles, which really was dealing with strengthening the small business sector.
And that's the book you're working on now?
Well, I mean, yes, I am working on a book, but I'm focusing on Soweto as to the journey that the Soweto entrepreneur has traveled, so that it's an inspiration to the young Soweto people, to say that if at all we had the likes of Ntsiki in 1905, Mweli Scotta, can mention the entrepreneurs of 1905, and then came the Lisolangs and the Maponyas later on, the Habakuk Shikwanes. One has got to start putting a focus on those people so that they become an inspiration to the rest of the black community. Because you've got to get the lion writing his story than allowing the hunter to always write the story for the lion, because he's always then the winner. So now we've got the lion writing the story of how blacks have succeeded in the past against great odds. And that must be an inspiration to the present generation, people like yourselves. And that's the basis of the book.
Thank you so much. I'm hoping that we can call you to come and talk to our youth entrepreneurs at some point, because you were late for the session, so we don't have much time with you, and we would have loved to get some more of your pearls of wisdom.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That will be a pleasure.
Please and thank you. And there's the alarm clock telling us that our time is up. Thank you so much, Dr. Mazwai.
Okay.
Inspiring story. It's so nice to get to know how your journey went. There's so much more we could have gone into. I'm hoping you're going to come back for part 2, but we just want to thank you so much for your contribution, not only for raising these amazing kids that are doing amazing things, but also your contribution in the country and what you've done for Black people as a whole. We do see your journey. Siyabulela.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Dada.
Okay.
Who are you when all you were has been diluted by lies and white lines cancelling out all that which has been written of your history? Why do you look at yourself as a mystery? Doesn't the sun shine because you open your eyes? Doesn't the moon stay situated within the same stars your DNA sparkles off? Your spirit knows that surely corner into e off. Buza umoya so you may return to being well off. Because spiritually you are rich, yet your ancestors cry because you are out of reach. But yours is to command all elements while God takes inspiration from the very mirror she looked at to become. Remember who you are and never finish just when they think that with you they are done.